everybody. This is Matt Harris with Verado, and today I have the pleasure of talking to Ben Marks, famous in the e-commerce world, if you don't know already. Currently ambassador for the PHP Foundation, co-founder of Nomicore. I hope I said that right. Founder and managing partner of Comvisory, and past experiences, director of global marketing development for Shopware, founder of the Magento Association, Magento evangelist at Adobe, and Magento evangelist at Magento, and director of development at Blue Acorn, amongst other things. I think further back in your past, but that hits the. I think that hits the. That was like 10 years right there, 15 maybe.
We didn't even get into my rap sheet. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's been. I tell you what, it's been a fun career for you. Considering that this whole career that I've had was entirely, like, even the origin story was all accidental. I feel pretty damn fortunate to be honest.
Yeah, I can relate. I know the feeling. I started my life as a sculptor, so you know.
Okay, I'm sure there's a connection. We probably get into that sometime.
Yeah, there is none. So no, anyway. So no, I think I noticed that so my background, I think they're very similar, but in the good old days, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and in the e-commerce space, and internet in general, website development in general, we had people. I was in New York at the time, and we had people with all different kinds of backgrounds.
Yep.
Which, ironically, very few computer science people, like in that space at that time.
I mean, it's anecdotal, but I find that to have been pretty common. You just didn't see a lot of like classic comp sci or electrical engineering degrees in the room. I mean, even when I was I was employee number one at Blue Acorn, I built out the whole development apparatus. It definitely improved and matured far beyond what we had built. I think I left at about 19 developers in 2014. I went to join Magento full time, but I was hiring some comp sci grads, but to be honest, the 6 area higher learning institutions in Charleston, they weren't learning anything web dev related at all. I mean, they literally didn't touch PHP, like I think even for more than a day. So I mean, it's I guess it's because and I did finally start going to these institutions saying, like, what the hell are you teaching these guys? Like, I can't. Why am I having to remediate? And it wasn't just like PHP. I was having to explain stateless protocol to them. I was having to really just get into like how all of this works. And their response was, well, we can't, PHP web, like this is all very new technology, and we just, it changes so fast. We can't. I'm like, you're okay, but you're doing a disservice. But that said, I mean, the things that you learn, like as a Java developer, or certainly if you were a practicing Java developer, that certainly lent itself really well, especially to Magento, which was basically a Java enterprise app written in PHP.
Right. Yeah, totally. Like when I started, there were a lot of, the industry was kind of like, well, we're not really sure if this thing's going to last, this web thing. Better to learn like machine, coding and, Cobalt and whatever. But, forward. So there's a lot of parallels, which I think we could get into between the current state, which is the AI race and the whole .com race of the 90s and early 2000s. I'm seeing a lot of similarities between that time period and this time period, which we could get into. But I think I'm more interested in kind of digging into your PHP, Magento, and Shopware background, because obviously, that's very similar to my agency and our background in the tech stack that we've been working on for years. And where do you think, well, first of all, God, we could get into this, but let me just put it this way, and I'm sure you have an opinion about this. How durable is PHP for the next 10 years in terms of a kind of primary language?
Well, it has historically done well. I mean, but that is true of technology and platform decisions in general, they tend to be incredibly inertial. Even more so, like I'm always shocked at the inertial sort of weight or inertial moment of past decisions, right? So but PHP was always very easy to learn. I mean, I was an autodidact. Like I had no programming background, and PHP, it was just a really friendly language. It was pretty simple to get up and running. You could make, just one small file, do something, and it would give you, I would say, it wouldn't tell you, give you a stack trace with like null pointer exceptions. Looking at you, Java, it would say, hey man, I think you forgot to put like a semicolon on maybe line 32 of this file. It was great. The parser was, it had humble beginnings, written CGI binaries written in C in 94 by Rasmus. And I think, and while it has evolved several times over since then, and is in its latest, I think we went probably from there into, kind of, I think you could say into the Zend era, where you had big corporate backing and stewardship. And then you kind of had this wondering if, like Facebook was going to take over and completely change the language into Hack or something else. And then you now have what I consider the current PHP 7 forward iteration, where the internals were completely redone. And you have the whole thing run by a foundation, which I was very chuffed to serve as ambassador, and now I'm director of fundraising for. So it's quite a relevant question, right?
I figured.
And the preamble there, probably a little bit too much, but I think it goes to show that like PHP has been around in some form or fashion, and around and available for people to build with since the 90s. And people have continued to build with and on it. And the cool thing is you have other things that have, if you consider PHP maybe like a fourth generation abstraction, right? So you mentioned like assembly. Like if you're like writing in binary and, in assembly, and then you start going up, you're basically abstracting away, having to deal with a lot of stuff that, depending on what you're trying to do, we can just let the machines or the runtime environments handle. And PHP remains a very developer-friendly tool that frameworks have now come in, and you could kind of look at these as there's almost like fifth generation or sort of, they're like 4.5, like generation 4.5, right? Because they do a lot of the heavy lifting at the application level. I mean, these are like the Laravel's symphonies. To some degree, you could even say like Magento, Shopware, other application spaces,
WordPress.
Yeah, WordPress. WordPress is kind of is in its own little category, I would put, but it basically creates the rules of engagement, gives you some things that work, with some kind of orthogonality to the system, and I think that is a good recipe. It's a good basis or DNA to have, because you can move forward from there. But I do think this is challenging, the 10-year out view. So you asked me, basically is PHP safe for 10 more years, right? I think without some intentional curation and advocacy, not Herculean by any chance, but or by any sense, but I think without people doing intentional work, PHP has succeeded because of its very nature. But I think it's going, the nature of development and what it means to be a developer and what it means to build things is going to shift. And we know from the past that if I can read a hex dump and actually know what that means, I'm going to look at someone doing PHP going, well, you don't know how to actually really do this stuff. But it doesn't matter, because as long as you're effective with the tools at hand and you can move things forward, then you are the next generation. And I would love to see PHP continue to be part of the next generation, part of the story, but in an AI, a generative AI development world, the tool, I think the language, the tools, those are going to matter less and less. I mean, at least at a top level, you can build and deploy functionality, and it's going to be augmentation to existing functionality for now. But it's going to be, it's basically, it's only going to matter what if I go to ChatGPT and say, hey, build me this app or build me this site, and ChatGPT decides to use, Next, like JavaScript or PHP or Go or something else. That's only going to be that basically the underlying language is is largely immaterial until I need to do something, performance related, or I need to, I need to introduce some other kind of tooling or put it in place next to other applications, and I want them to easily interoperate, right? I mean, it's just, again, I think if we're not telling the story of PHP and we're not also involving people into PHP to help shape where it's going, then it will probably, it stands a chance of dying kind of a heat death, right? As attention and investment and employment and entrepreneurship, just sort of go into more general direction, right? It'll be a little bit more like the normal flow of water. It'll just take the easiest path forward, and PHP and other languages end up in the dustbin of history. But I think if we kind of shape things just a little bit, we can work with some of those forces and make sure that it's still around as long as it's relevant to be so.
Yeah. It's funny. That's like a parallel to a lot of stuff I see going on with some of the open source communities, where the nature of the technology made it vibrant and kept it alive or grew it. And now intentionality is what's going to keep it alive moving forward. But I want to get back to some of the things you were saying, because I see parallels between just the evolution of technology in general. So, you have the evolution of systems and inherited systems and things being derivative of previous systems. Mm-hmm. And there's this idea when new tech comes, it's a replacement instead of a this and scenario. So like when TV came out, they thought it would replace radio, right? Yeah. And then radio's still there. So, with media, it's more and not like replacement necessarily. And I think technology is the same way. Like if you just look at, even in the physical world, you look at the way something is built and assembled, and you strip it of its, individual parts. No one really knows how every single component goes together, but I can take some pieces and assemble them into like a car, or a toaster or whatever. But you're like, I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't know how to mine for copper, right? Yeah. I'm not a smelter, right? Yeah. Right. But there's like this, there's this inheritance that we all kind of take for granted, mm-hmm. which was the foundation of the stuff that we're working with now. So as much as I think I get what you're saying is like, yeah, people might be vibe coding stuff in PHP and they don't really know PHP maybe the way you do, but it doesn't mean they're not delivering results in PHP.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone's job is to, do their job, right? At the bare minimum, do their job. But ideally, their job is setting them up to do to do increasingly more and more things. I mean, this is this is certainly the case in like the, like maybe the service sector, or like the kind of self-aggrandized term, but knowledge economy. Mm-hmm. But but there ideally would be growth, or it would be very clear, like, hey, your job is to go in here and like pull this lever every day. But I think, just like we saw industrialization, eliminate a lot of that work, and those people had to then find other things to do. I think we're facing the same kind of industrial revolution style pressures on knowledge work, and mm-hmm. because we've provided access to to systems that understand the language, the patterns, even sort of the qualities of what might make a system maintainable. So like I think with a small, if I know nothing about programming and I'm given a task of what's the classic programming task, make a to-do app. Say a classic, sort of modern classic task of creating a to-do app. I can throw a pretty limited specification at any of the generative engines, and probably even like open source transformers and LLMs, and it's going to give me probably a usable output. And then if I really want to understand, I can look under the hood. I don't try out an analogy here. It's like, I grew up at the time of cassettes and Walkmen, right? Mm-hmm. And it was fun to I got into music and I was a professional musician for a while. But it was neat because I could take the music that's in this thing here in this tape and put it in the Walkman and I can experience it. I can't really, other than I can't get into the music. I have to dissect that with my mind. I took more than one Walkman apart, right? Mm-hmm. And being able to get in under the hood, not everyone needs to, not everyone should. Arguably, I shouldn't have. I always had parts left over, even though they always kept working. That's why my wife won't let me work on her airplane. They don't put extra parts on those things. So, but being able to get under the hood is cool. So and actually I think that there's another parallel there with like web. This is one of the cool things about web technology. Well, at least it was for a long time. If you were looking at a website, especially in the 2000s, if you're looking at a website, and this was like, I graduated college in 2000. So like, this was when I was starting to kind of get into programming and the web, and you could view source, and you could figure out how, like that document is structured, and you're like, holy shit, this is just text. And you can, and depending on your mind, you can like how your mind works. It was easy or not to sort of understand, oh, I have like, everything is just a container of containers, and each of these containers has different purposes and does different things. And then of course CSS comes along, and you can have a design level interaction with that and control the UI a bit. But like, that's an interesting parallel, is that, if you just needed to like use the web to do something, you could do that, and it doesn't matter what's underneath. But it was really cool that you could always peel it open and go, oh, let me look at these internals and see how it's all going. And if I put this here or do this here, when I meet people, if they have kids or if they're trying to figure out, how web works, I'm like, well, use a Chrome based browser. And then what is it like, Option Command I, and it'll pop open the developer tools, and you can actually see how these elements all sort of stack into each other.
Yeah. And you can even start editing the CS right in there.
Right in there, man.
Right in there. And you can start changing the website that you didn't even build.
Create some really nifty snapshots or screenshots.
I don't like this font. Let me change it. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I want to show the bank that I have, $10 million in there.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm sure you are too, is the value proposition, the fundamental value proposition of open source. And one of the things that I have been noticing, it's a kind of an argument that I make, is that it's a hard thing to kill off. Like the idea that you have open source platforms that people can play around with on their own. This is like not really, this is kind of outside of the AI discussion, but maybe it isn't. But that world and the value that it delivers to the people using it, the practitioners of the technology, but also the businesses and clients using the technology, is very fluid and adaptive, and kind of a hard thing to fully replace. Like as soon as you think one of those technology stacks is dead, it seems to like figure out how to make itself relevant again in the marketplace. And so there's this, simplified argument, which is probably an oversimplification, but is the future SaaS or is the future open source, right? And so I kind of feel like, again, it's probably both, but I was wondering what your viewpoint is on the role of open source. Obviously we know the background of it with the web in particular, but like, what do you think is kind of the future of open source? And this maybe relates to PHP as well.
Well, in some circles, I've been referred to as sort of like the, open source commerce guy, or, e-commerce guy. Like it's, and it probably people could use that either as a pejorative salutation or a pejorative. Exactly. It is what it is. And it just happens to be, that's where I've made my bones. Right. But there again, it speaks to sort of the pervasiveness and utility of PHP, both as a sort of facilitator of its own, I guess its own longevity. It allows people to come in and be, very high level and then get deep. And if you listen, if you pay attention to any of like the developers working for PHP Foundation, if you listen to their talks, like there are a few, and these are some of the smartest people I've ever met. And I've been fortunate in my career to meet, tens of thousands of people. And they'll say like, I wasn't even a great developer, but you care. And you basically find out, that's one little thing I want to fix. Or like, I like this thing over in this other language. What if we had like namespaces in PHP? Wouldn't that make things easier? We could eliminate a lot of boilerplate. We could, facilitate the development environments much better, right? We could help our editing environments understand the environment in which they're working. All of this. So there's a couple of points to address in there. So free, FOSS or OSS or OS, whatever you want to call it, free open source software is how it used to be. Open source was meant free, and then we've had to commercialize it over the past few years. That's just been a reality, and I think it speaks to how business has evolved, right? So, but generically, you can call it open source. If you have like a commercialized open source, we call it open core. This is the model behind Magento, but model behind Shopware, where you have a free version and then the commercial,
right?
Sort of the expansion of feature set on top of that is all, it's still open. The core is open and humanly readable. You're supposed to pay to use it. It can't be killed off because, well, it's hard to kill off, and the reason it's hard to be to kill off is because the barrier to entry, I think, always remains low, and that has been important in the past. In the generative AI world, it's going to be less of a factor. But you have willing participants, right? And the participation there, again, is this kind of virtuous cycle. I've cited my origin story in PHP and really in Magento. I didn't know what open source was. I just knew, for me, it was like, oh, here's this free software. I don't know how they made money. And the founders, by the way, at the time were like, yeah, we don't know how we're going to make money. But I have this free software. I can get into it and I can inspect it and I can maybe hope to start to follow along, because the cool thing about serial execution is it goes from here to here to here. I can get in under the hood and I can basically set my level of involvement, right? It can be top line. I can just be using the software to do my e-commerce job, or I can start to understand how to move things around on the screen, create additional functionality, et cetera, et cetera. That willing participation of getting in. And for me, it was like I was just in the IRC chat that was sort of the only place to find Magento professionals and figure things out, fellow Magento professionals. And, and my colleague, Vinay Kopp, who's now CTO at Hiva, which is a very important evolution in the Magento world, fantastic human being, basically took me into a private chat and took 3 hours to explain layout XML, which was like an XML format for configuring the UI, right? It was just a completely alien concept to me because I'd never seen Java apps before. But he did that, and I wanted to pay him. Literally at the end of 3 hours, well, I'm working for this agency. You provided me extraordinary value. How do I pay you? He's like, so his response was basically along the lines of, this is open source. How you pay, you don't pay me back, you pay us back, because he's paying it forward. And so he says, basically, as you start to learn more and more, consider holding the ladder for the person behind you is the basic idea. It's the classic each one teach one model. And what happens with that, though, when you have people working beyond the 9 to 5, they're doing a little bit more than just their job. They will find these tools that give them incredible utility. They'll recognize some of them will recognize the benefit that they're benefiting from the sort of extracurricular energy and time, money of others, and they'll put back into it. Maybe they'll contribute to the tools that they're using to improve them. Maybe they'll take those tools and they'll integrate them in other environments. And so you have willing participation. That's important feature one. Important feature one is that you can opt in your own level of involvement, right? You choose your own adventure. You're therefore willing participant, right? So we'll call that point one. And then it's incredibly sticky because it's getting put in more and more places, because it's easy to use, because it's easy to find others who can do things with it. It starts to become, you get these little loci everywhere, and you have little sub communities and guilds and specialists grow around it. And before you know it, you have this huge web of interconnected professionals at sort of all levels of involvement, and the net effect of all of that, whether they're contributing code level fixes or new features, whether they're filing bugs, whether they're writing blog posts, hosting conferences, podcasts, writing, magazines, all these contributions are what constitute this, a community. And again, it gives people a sense of belonging. It gives people a sense of being able to move forward in their career and their job, being able to provide more for themselves, for the world in which they're working. And that leads us to the changes that happen over time with technology, the advent of commodity computing. Let's look at like cloud computing, right? So I don't actually have to host my own infrastructure. I can just sort of generically rely on any of these big vendors, throw my stuff into their world. Might have to shim my way depending on how they have their services set up, and all of a sudden, what open source used to be really strongly aligned with, I'm hosting it on my own stuff or with a very capable hosting partner or an app hosting environment. And then you're like, well, but now here's SaaS over here. And SaaS is kind of cool because it combines infrastructure with application. And I am no longer having to all the overhead of having to build and maintain and update something. My vendor is handling like all of that for me, and I just merely pay, a regular or semi-regular vig for that. It's an appealing business model. If I were a technology buyer, like if I were at a merchant and I were asked to solve a problem, and the problem being like, what e-commerce platform should we use? Magento became popular because it was super, super flexible. It was also very unpopular because it was super, super flexible, right? You could do anything with it. And sometimes people really did, like in ways that they shouldn't. And then you have the problem of, again, this it's not this, you can't, it's not centrally updated. It's updated. Basically you have to go and you have to work. And if you built things wrong, or if the vendor or community maintaining it didn't appreciate how exactly you're using it, that core update, which didn't break anything on their end, might break stuff on your end. SaaS gave us this reliability. I mean, and then that's how we have in the e-commerce world, the classic, I call it a continuum of, like, on the one end, you have the open source, like Magento's, Shopwares, PrestaShop, Silius, others. And then at the other end, and it's a false dichotomy, by the way. But at the other end, you have SaaS and you have Shopify, who in BigCommerce, especially. And you have now BigCommerce kind of figured on early that they're, like, as Shopify started to win more and more, that, hey, I think BigCommerce was wise, or Commerce Now is wise to position themselves as being more open, basically still having that black box core, but trying to build for and facilitate flexibility. And that's where these things come together. So to get to the big answer here of FOSS, whether if open source can be killed off or not, I think it's important to recognize that the expectations of the market have moved. The expectations are important, and that started with buyers, but I think it's also the practitioners. The number one thing that pisses like Magento developers off was the fact that they were having to spend a lot of time on things like upgrades and things like, and getting extensions to work and stuff. And so you become frustrated, especially when you're looking over at Shopify. I don't think I've ever seen anyone complain about a Shopify core update because they're all completely transparent. They don't tend to break things, but that happens because Shopify builds for a particular box. They've done a good job of slowly expanding the merchants that fit into this box. This is a Jason Nias observation. I won't take credit for it, but like he was the one that really put it to me in a way that made sense. Jason's president of Shopware. He's like, look, I mean, if you fit in Shopify's box, freaking awesome. Use Shopify all day long, or BigCommerce or whatever platform. Use that box, right? But understand that if you need to start doing things outside that box, they really don't build for that kind of flexibility. BigCommerce being a bit of an exception. So FOSS, or open source, the flexibility there, we're never going to solve. We're never going to come up with one true way for people to buy and sell stuff to each other. So there's always going to be a need for customization, and the SaaS vendors are always going to try and be more and more flexible. But at some point, flexibility always comes. It's like this is a Newtonian principle, like equal and opposite reaction. Like the equal and opposite there is the more flexibility you have, probably the more complexity you have. And so you can only go so far with a SaaS system, but that the expectations, the reliability, the apparent sort of de-risked total cost of ownership of a SaaS platform is setting the expectation, though, for how open source projects should run, right? So this kind of gave rise to some of like, Heroku and other sort of app focused hosting environments. And I think we're gonna need to continue to evolve open source away from this idea that like open source means open code and I run my own infrastructure. So the more that these vendors, and you've seen it over the years, Magento had to create a cloud product that's now Adobe Cloud, and so basically a completely different thing. Shopware itself has played around with trying to have a SaaS offering or having a SaaS offering, and also a cloud version that was also on Platform SH, now Upsun. And it's all about how can we help developers do their job without having to think about all the bullshit. And I think as long as open source projects and vendors are, keeping in mind who their customer is and what their problems are, and solves for those, then they will enjoy longevity. That was a really, really long answer for that, but I think it's a really, really important thing to recognize, because it's not SaaS good, open source bad, or open source good, SaaS bad. It's what are the expectations of the people who have to pay for this stuff, and what are the expectations, importantly, of the people who have to deliver against the expectations of those people paying for the stuff.
Right. So, some of the things I talk about with open source is this gets into kind of the composable versus monolith, or the with SaaS systems and the big corporations, just to say, like, they basically want you to put all of your data in a single system, and they're going to give you the benefits of all the evolving technologies, supposedly. So if you're a customer of Oracle, you can use NetSuite, Suite Commerce, NetSuite CRM. You can put all your data business data in a single system, and don't worry, brother Oracle is going to take care of you. And Adobe kind of tries to do the same thing, I think. And they all do. Microsoft, the same. It's like, this gets back to also, in my view, like the durability of open source, which I think is an interesting parallel to kind of the corporatization and privatization of technology. And then there's this also kind of this Wild West, open source world that's saying, no, we actually don't need profit incentives to build the best in class technologies. We can just do it because we love playing around with it, and that our customers are going to get, the vendors are going to get the benefit of this work, and we're going to create careers around it. Is that a dead concept?
We're dangerously close to economic theory.
I know,
and I am 100% not the person you want to hear from. There's a woman out, Kyla Scanlon. Absolutely brilliant. There are others out there, but Kyla's got a Substack and everything. KYLASCANLON. Follow her. Very, very objective, informed, digestible takes on all sorts of things. So, and I mention it because I do think it's important for people to in this moment to dig into the forces of, when I look at the increasing wealth disparity in this modern society, especially in the U.S. And this is an apolitical point. I mean, it objectively the case that wealth disparity is
getting worse.
Sticking.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important indicator. It's informative, right? It tells you about the priorities. And I think your question is perfectly framed. Sort of doing the good thing for goodness sake is the luxury of the people with the money. And when there are fewer and fewer of those people with the money and the time and leisure to do this stuff, and they, the people who don't need to buy the second yacht, I'll use a nice straw man there. When there are fewer people there, there's just going to be fewer of these opportunities around, right? So I think it is. Well, I put it another way. It is always important to do the good things and to think about who you might support coming along behind you. But at the end of the day, everyone's got rent, mortgage, whatever, healthcare bills to pay. I think we are, what I perceive, and this may be a function of, getting older, which I do every day, you do as well. I see less of like the rosy picture and more, I just see more of sort of I get more of a clearer vision around the end stage of capitalism. right? And I'm not going to say we're there, and I'm not going to say I fully understand the implications of what I'm saying. I just know that it seems like the world tends to start eat itself more and more. And on a micro scale, we see this in any platform environment. Platforms will tend to start to eat their own. You made the point about advertising. You know, when are the Gen AI engines all going to become ad platforms? I mean, Kelly Getch was one of the first to call it out, but it's not a, you know, it's not.
It's
really,
already happening.
It's not a. You know, look at the browser wars that are now out there. Like Comet, you know, Perplexity is now actively, as of last night, I'm getting ads. I've had access to Comet for a while, but Perplexity's browser, like it is advertising in my Facebook feed, like, hey, use this. You should be using this, you know, and basically implying you're a schmuck if you're not using this. But you know, now ChatGPT has dropped what is it, Atomic, whatever it is. Their you know, agentic browser, and they're both like literally generative AI engines bolted onto Chrome, right? So I mean, we're not you know, we're not sending anyone to the moon or to Mars with this stuff. This is, I mean, it's useful, but anyone that ever played around with like Puppeteer, while it was kind of brittle and very hands-on, I mean, you basically just said, hey, now at least I've got a junior developer, you know, with amazing context that I can interact with, and it's doing the same thing. So, you know, so there again, I think it is important that we focus on value creation in our own lives beyond the mighty dollar or euro or whatever, and also and especially value creation for those around us. And I wish I were in a position to be doing more of that. I'm actually on the position of like, I need to try and make as much money as I can. I mean, that's just the reality of where I am. But I hope to get to a point where I can say, I'm basically retired, and now I'm going to try and I'm going to, you know, grow 4 more arms and hold up more ladders. But it also gets to your other point about monolith versus composable.
Yeah. So like, I go back to the Gilded Age. I think we're in the Gilded Age again, right? And the Gilded Age, basically late 1800s, all the way up to World War I, when things started breaking, probably for good reason. You had this massive industrialization and infrastructure, and you ended up with a few winners. And that handful of winners became like exorbitantly wealthy, unlike anything we'd seen before.
Yep.
Now you have the same thing kind of happening again, right? And then, but there's a couple things. In the 90s, I felt a lot of optimism. And I felt like the internet bred a lot of optimism, particularly with young people. And they were like, oh, this is this new thing. We can latch onto this new thing. I can create a career for myself, kind of on my own terms. And there wasn't really anything scary about it in terms of what it could become at that point. There's a lot of optimism. And maybe that's because I was young. Mm-hmm. The amount of money that we're putting into these data centers for AI is unlike anything we've ever seen. We didn't even put that much money into infrastructure in the 1800s when we built the Gilded Age. And the results are scary. They're not the potential of what we're going to build is not, it's not like being blossoming with optimism. It's really kind of a lot of people, you know, wringing their hands going, I don't know what this is going to do. And I feel like and I don't want this to be a dark conversation or a dark podcast, but to me, it's like, that's something interesting. What was really interesting to me about open source is it was part of that optimistic viewpoint of what the internet could be. And then we created a model of community-based value creation, which was kind of unlike things that we'd seen before. You could say, okay, maybe we're doing this in our towns and our churches and whatever, but it was like, this was global and it was very exciting. So with this new burgeoning generation of technology, is there some kind of like rebellious version or revolutionary version of this tech that's going to take a youth movement and get them to latch onto it the way we did when I was in my 20s and be like, actually, we can use this to empower a new world? Or are we just going to roll over and say, you know what, the techno-feudalists won?
Well, that's God, jeez. Again, it's a well posed question. I wish I were a better, I'm becoming more and more aware of these things, of the various topics that are pulled into that.
Right.
And I wish I were better versed in them so I could give a better response. I'm just spend a lot of time these days listening to smart people in these different areas. There's a US guy, he's become a social media phenom. Like he's visiting like university in Denmark, he's a visiting professor, but he like studies essentially the history of like revolution and counterculture. And I think it's important because I think, you know, the tech mavens, like they have won, like the, you know, this kind of infrastructure, just the cost, just the electricity involved,
right,
to do this. I mean, we're seeing what we're seeing right now is an entirely false economy. I'm sure you've seen that the graphic going around like LinkedIn, where it's like, okay, well, NVIDIA makes this investment in Open API, which makes this investment here. And so you just have this complete inflation of what's happening. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to some fundamental units. And those fundamental units are like the materials needed to make, you needed to make GPUs, the material, the energy that needs to be produced in order to do all these calculations. Now you could have some kind of massive upset of this at some point, like where let's pretend someone comes up with fusion, like sustained fusion, and energy becomes basically free.
Yeah,
that would likely create all sorts of other problems that, again, I'm not prepared to discuss. But that could potentially say, well, okay, well, now that energy is free, we just have to keep creating more things. More GPUs and stuff. But I think though, we always see, cycles, the pendulum swings. It depends, the clock might be moving down the road, but the pendulum keeps swinging. And I do think you might see countercultural, forces, and maybe they're built inside the system. On the one hand, it has been recently pointed out online that like the adversarial computers of the Matrix, the AI of the Matrix, chose to placate all of humanity in the 90s, because the 90s was the best time in the world. I'm not in a position to disagree. I miss, my wife and I talk about this over the last month. We really missed the 90s. It was amazing. But, but you had this revolution that sprung up inside the machine, and we actually might be poised to that. So I could even see something where, like, how hackers have easily exfiltrated, firewalled corporate data from, at DEF CON this year. They were grabbing like HubSpot CRM data, exfiltrating it just through clever prompt manipulation. I could see people sort of coming up with these parallel systems, and that's why I bring up this U.S. professor working in Denmark, because what he's looking for in terms of counterculture, or when you see some party or an authoritarian figure, just bringing that up as a hypothetical, come into power. The effectiveness of a movement against that really depends on not just big words. It actually depends on creating alternate structures of government, basically really organizing entirely new systems to operate, and be a counter to those forces. And absent that, you're not going to see it. So I could see people building inside the you would think protected, centured, AI centured walls of AI systems. But we'll have to see what's possible, and hey, who knows? There was what was the big solar flare event that happened, and like it shocked every telegraph operator in the world. It was an amazing thing back then, because it was notable. Like the telegraph lines, which normally required some kind of power injection, they operated on their own. It was a Carrington event.
When was this?
1859.
Okay.
Right? So we were talking telegraphs, right? But
Yeah,
there were all these phenomena, and it was just because like you had long, you had long conductive things operating in a magnetic field, and it was inducing electricity. I think that's how that works. And you know what? Now, though, if that happened, we would be knocking satellites out of the sky. We would be, you and I would not be having this conversation, because all of the switches, everything needed to run everything would get wiped out. And I'm not sure that would be a bad thing. It would only bother me because the preppers would be proved right, but at least for a time being. But I mean, it's almost like we need some kind of some kind of counter to all of this.
There's also like, okay, so yeah, totally. I feel like, history repeats itself. It doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? Isn't it the Mark Twain quote?
Yep.
Like, so the big 7 technology companies, by and large, weren't around when I was born. I don't think any of them were, actually. So, like, the largest companies in the world, the most powerful companies in the world now, didn't exist when I was born. And a lot of them didn't exist when I was even in college, right? So, is there 30 years from now going to be 5 huge companies that we don't even know the names of yet?
I think the cycles are going to be even faster.
Okay. So that leads to my next question is there going to be solutions that emerge with this new technology that solve problems that we don't even know are solvable yet? And are there going to be young people that are going to get on board with this and be like, holy crap, this is a new generation where we actually can fix the shit our parents broke? And, like, is there going to be a new wave of optimism that I'm not seeing right now, but it's just we're not there yet?
I think it depends on economic opportunity.
Right.
I mean, if people, but like, I think our generation, we are the last generation to have had it, sort of an easiness of expectation and relative ease of progression, at least up until now. The kids, the millennials and the generations behind them, or micro generations behind them, they're doing interesting things. Like they're having to live at home. They're not basically their parents' dreams are not their dreams, and the possibilities aren't their possibilities. But they're doing like they're drinking less.
Yeah.
Like this is a time like Gen Xers would be pounding the
totally.
So I think it's interesting, and I see more and more. I live on a street corner here on a beach, and I'm there are more and more young folk. They're out there being healthy. They're running. They're different. And they're different ways that make me feel a bit old, but it's good. It's progress.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's going to come down to, if you've got one person worth $2 trillion and everyone underneath them is worth less than $100,000, and they control everything, just, as a kind of unreasonable, hypothetical,
it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. Like the system, we're all like one big part of one big Ouroboros system, and we're gonna eat ourselves until we, spit ourselves back up or reborn or whatever.
Yeah. We don't have to get into this the next time I talk, but I think that, like, to me, the interesting thing is what's an optimistic view of what technology can become? What is and then I do want to get into headless a little bit and talk about how, like, that didn't become what people thought it was going to become, that it doesn't mean it's dead. And maybe you have a different view on that. That I think is more germane to kind of like where we started. But I have to sign off. Okay. Sorry, we ran out of time, literally ran out of time. Ben Marks, it was a pleasure. We're definitely having you back on the podcast. We're going to get into some of this some more. I appreciate everything you're doing. And I look forward to seeing you at some of our community events. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it, Matt.